You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to see the video version of this broadcast. You can go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification. You can find out everything you need to know about the show and see what's going on there. Refer your friends to thecvpn.com, chrisvosspodcastnetwork.com. There's 9 podcasts that are over there. You can also now go to an Amazon page that we've set up, an Amazon shop. It's amazon.com/shop/Chris Voss, and it features all the great authors that we've had on the show, kind of some review blurbs on them, and so you can see that. You can, if you just want to go there and be like, I want to see all the authors that have been on the Chris Voss Show, you can actually go there and see their books, and of course the links to buy them, which I'm sure the authors would certainly approve of you doing. So be sure to check that out as well. You can go to the new book club we just launched at patreon.com/Chris Voss. Getting to the most interesting author that we have today. This gentleman is Frank Huyler. He has written the book White Hot Light, and he's actually written several different books, which we'll get into and talk about. Frank is an emergency physician in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the author of Blood of Strangers, The Laws of Invisible Things, The Right of Thirst, and his poetry has been featured in The Atlantic, the Georgia Review, and Poetry, among other things. Welcome to the show. How are you, Frank?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome sauce. So I got a chance to go through your book here, and this is an extraordinary, not only human, but a really interesting look into what goes on. Give us some plugs on where people can find you on the interwebs and everything else.
Sure. Well, the book is available in most bookstores, I think, now, Barnes & Noble certainly, and on Amazon, always at this era particularly, their Amazon page. And it's, I think, pretty widely around the country at the moment.
Awesome sauce. So what was the reason that you wrote this book, and what motivated you?
Sure. So I should probably back up a little bit. I'm a physician. I'm an emergency physician working in an emergency room. And I've been doing this for quite a long time now, about almost 25 years, about 25 years. And when I was young, right out of my residency, I wrote a book called The Blood of Strangers, which was sort of a young person's take on the medical world, the world of emergency medicine particularly. And after that, I kind of moved away a little bit from writing directly about medicine and wrote some fiction, some novels and other things. And then at this point, 20 years later, kind of in midlife, I realized that it might be time to sort of revisit those same kinds of questions and issues that I was trying to sort of wrestle with as a young person from the position of someone being older. And so really this book now, White Hot Light, is in many ways sort of a midlife sequel of that first book.
Mm-hmm. And it's been vaunted by the New York Times Book Review, another pitch-perfect book of short essays, stories that are very interesting, that are both human and what's the right word? And they're in an ER situation of desperation and emergency, and you guys are saving lives. Share with us some of the stuff out of the book that you'd like to.
Sure. The way the book is structured is I didn't take. People have asked me if I took notes, and I didn't take notes. And I also I was very careful to protect patient confidentiality and issues like that. So basically, what I did is I thought back. I had a fellowship at a writers' colony, the McDowell Colony, during a sabbatical, and I just basically sat there and thought back of the events and stories that I'd been part of and seen over the last 20 or so years, and sort of let my memory serve as a filtering device in a way. The stories that I remembered most powerfully came back to me. It was really interesting to sit there in a cabin and thinking back on your life, and I think that's true for everyone if you had to do that. So the stories tend to be short. They tend to be fairly easily read. I mean, they're not long. They're I would say a little more than vignettes, but very short kind of stories. And my point in writing about medicine was not simply to write about medicine, not simply to write about emergency medicine, but really to kind of explore some larger questions that a novelist might explore. How the medical world reveals truths about our own lives, regardless of where we are or what kind of jobs we have. So I'm hoping that readers will see that it's not entirely about sort of true stories from the ER. That the intention is really to use those kinds of events, which tend to be very, very striking and powerful, to also look beyond them at some of the questions that we all face all the time in our lives.
So you talked about how you faced questions when you were young, and I imagine that was as a doctor, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a resident physician, meaning during medical school and residency, and then shortly afterwards.
And this is like when you're first getting into seeing what you're going to see in an ER situation of trauma and everything else, and trying to probably either relate to it or try and put it in its place as to what you're dealing with. Because I imagine the first time that you're starting to really experience that's kind of you have to somehow put that in your mind in a place that you can deal with it, I guess.
Yeah, there's a very strong sort of apprenticeship process where you go to medical school, and you get suddenly exposed, particularly during your residency, to these cases and events and pressure and having to make quick decisions and all of that. That's really a new world. And the human response to that initially is to get very detached and distant, or start making like dark jokes, black humor, that kind of thing. And it's a very predictable pattern. And
Wow.
so, and it happens quickly. And everyone kind of goes through that. And then you find that, as time passes, you want to try to recapture some of the, I guess, maybe not humanity, but at least the emotional accessibility that you quickly learn to protect yourself from.
Mm-hmm.
In any kind of job like this.
Yeah, I was just going to say you probably do have to build a little bit of barriers, or like you say initially, sometimes you knee jerk to some barriers as a human being because there's a part of you have to protect, and you're trying to do this beautiful thing to save humans and save human life and be a protector, but then again, the shock and horror of it all. I mean, there's lots of stories in the book. I believe there's one story about a veteran who's got a brain filled with shrapnel. There's lots of stuff that you have to deal with, and I know the hours are long for doctors and what they have to go through. What were some of the stories in the book that maybe you want to share that stood out to you, that or maybe changed you from a human level?
I think there's a lot of stories like that in the book, ranging from really dramatic events, like somebody. The beginning, the first story in the book is about a boy who was shot, and he's about exactly the same age as my son. And they didn't look alike, but nonetheless, the first reaction you have as a parent when you see a boy shot is you think of your own family, your own life. That's just one of many examples. Another example is somebody that I worked with in a story called The Sunflower, who was a physician's assistant who I realized after he basically had a tragic event occur to him. And even though I worked with him for years, I never really knew him until after he was gone. And I realized that he had been a photographer, and he had traveled around the state on his motorcycle taking really beautiful photographs. It was a private life that he had that I didn't see, and no one else knew about it either. So there's a lot of stories like that in the book. That my intention about it was not to write about medicine from a technical perspective, but to write about the stories that we don't often always associate with hospitals or medicine. Typically, the way that hospital stories are presented, it's always, heroic doctors doing heroic thing, that kind of stuff, right? Or there might be some salacious thing, and I was more interested in not just doctors, but also everyone else in the hospital, nurses, the support staff, the techs, their sort of role and humanity in all of this. And also, and my own evolution, I guess, as you age. And you and I think, are probably about the same age or close to it. And I'm sure that, if you think back on your life, you'll have a different perspective than you did when you were starting.
I nowadays I've got, at 50, I'm 52 now, and you have a pattern of life that you can look back on, where you can see the wreckage, you can see the patterns, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can go,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that really, I should have went this. I should have seen a psychologist early.
Yeah,
saved a lot.
That was a mistake, wasn't it? Yeah, right.
Yeah. You can see the body stream behind you for 50 years, and you're just like, and then it becomes more obvious. I should have done something different with that. But there's what's hindsight's 2020. It's interesting to me. I've always looked up to what doctors do. I'm one of those people that if you try and take my blood, you probably know these people, I will almost pass out. I have to eat like a big meal before I take my blood. If I see too much blood on a movie screen, I'll pass out. So I have a lot of respect for what you guys do, because you guys save lives. And if I came across some of the scenes that you guys have to deal with every day, I'd probably just pass out, and I'd just be like, I don't know what to do here. I'm out. And so what you guys do is astounding and beautiful, but the humanity of it is something I've always wondered about, because, you guys are human too. You guys aren't above this sort of thing. And you guys see some of the stories in the book are quite extraordinary, especially when the attempt there is to really try and save life when it almost seems like it's not worth saving, or it's not that it's not worth saving, but the guy's gone, right?
Right.
And you guys are still in there trying to find a miracle if you can, and sometimes you do and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people want to believe that we save lots of lives, and of course, statistically, sure, people's life, you do occasionally save people, not as often, I hate to say it, as most people want to think. Most of the time when people are going to die, they're going to die. And when they're going to get better, they're going to get better. And there's only a pretty small window where modern medicine really makes a difference. And the whole enterprise is really designed for that relatively small percentage of people that you can make a difference for. So the majority of the time, we're not saving lives. We're trying to see people. We're trying to pick people out of the crowd who we might be able to help. It's not nearly as dramatic in the traditional way that society views medicine as that. There are lots of different challenges associated with it, but most of the people we see will either get worse or better on their own.
Yeah.
And in terms of your first point, which was that you see blood and you get faint, you'd be surprised. You see blood a few times and you'd be just fine. People have a very great essential toughness and resilience, and anyone who goes through this process will emerge from it just fine.
Yeah.
So the doctors and nurses are not any different from anyone else.
Do you feel that the shows like ER or House over glorify and maybe give a wrongful perception to your industry and what you guys do?
Of course. Completely.
Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. People want to see that. They want to believe, everything. There's like a magic answer. And if you're smart enough, like House or Sherlock Holmes, you can reason your way to the answer that no one else can find. And that's just not the truth. I mean, really, most of the time you're trying to check the box. You're gathering the same information that anyone else would gather. There's no terrible insight or great or a remarkable intellect that applies to almost everything in medicine. There's other qualities like diligence, like being thorough and careful. And there are certainly judgments that you make. But we like to think that this world is elegant and orderly, and if you're smart enough, you can find the answer. And the world is not elegant and not orderly, and it's chaotic, and and half the time we don't know what we're talking about, and that's the truth.
Well, a lot of times you guys are presented with situations that are you don't have a lot of time to sit around and go, well, what should we do with this? I mean, you guys are in the ER. You guys are, the situation is immediate. You don't have a lot of time to, well, we should have a meeting and see what we should do about this.
Right.
You guys are on top of it. It's life or death and seconds matter. And I remember years ago, we owned a courier company and we used to do blood and urine sample, basically body fluid samples. And we'd do the stat service. We'd have to go to the ER, pick up whatever blood, whatever the body samples were that they needed tests on. Cause they had some guy in the ER and they're like, we got to figure out why this guy has a problem. And, we had to race it to a company like ARUP. And then, they had to get it done. It had to be done very fast because lives are on the line. And there were times where we were picking up blood and bringing it back to the hospital from ARUP to, because they had a patient on the table who was bleeding internally and they couldn't figure out where he was bleeding internally. And I remember there was one time it seemed like we did 4 to 5 runs for blood for just one guy. Mm-hmm. That may be too much, but it was like at least 3, I think, where we did a blood run. And then he's still on the table. We still haven't figured out where the bleeding out, and just the level of expertise and that has to go into that, but extraordinary performance as a human being and being able to deal with it. But then you have the humanity side of it, which you deal with in the book as well. How you process it and some of the experiences that you have that balance that out. If you want to expand a little bit on those.
Yeah, sure. When people think about emergency rooms, emergency medicine, they think of lights and sirens and people getting shot and everyone running around and yelling stat and stuff like that. And
the whole Hollywood thing.
Yeah. And sure, there's a small percentage of it where it is a question of minutes, and it does happen. And it happens not uncommonly, but most of what you do is not about that. It's an old lady with abdominal pain in the middle of the night. Or it's a kid with an earache. I mean, it's or somebody with a heart attack that it may not be so clear that they have a heart attack. Those are the sorts of things. And then every once in a while you've got, all the drama and the adrenaline running around. And the fact is that most of the time, what to do. It's not terribly complicated. These highly dramatic moments. The challenge more has to do with doing them, doing them successfully, acting, and it's not so much knowing what to do, because usually it's when people are in a car wreck or shot or something, what needs to be done is quite clear. It's just a question of doing it fast enough and efficiently enough.
Is one of the biggest challenges is, you said there's a small percentage of people that you can actually save. Is it it's just one of the factors that by the time they get to you, I mean, obviously they've been through some sort of trauma and they have to wait for an ambulance to show up, then an ambulance shows up and the paramedics do everything they can. But I mean, I don't know, maybe sometimes there's, it's the time of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I meant by that is that the world gives us, there's illnesses like someone who has, let's say, advanced cancer, for example, then there's nothing you're going to do that's going to help them. Or somebody has pneumonia or a kidney infection, you might give them some antibiotics, but they're going to get better. They're going to get better. And the minority of cases or patients coming in are at the tipping point where a medical intervention will really, really help them. And particularly a quick one. Now, somebody getting shot, somebody in a car wreck is an example of that, because that's life-saving. So the trauma surgeons take them to the operating room and they save them, or not. But so there are examples, certainly. And but a lot of what we see, and most, is patients who don't have anywhere else to go. The emergency room, emergency departments around the country are in a lot of ways sort of like the canary in the coal mine for the country itself as a whole. Wow. You see people who don't have doctors, have no way of getting in to see the doctor, who run out of their medications. You see the consequences of poverty. You see the consequences of substance abuse, mental illness, all of the social problems that confront us as a country and as a nation are revealed in the ER like few other places. Wow.
That's extraordinary. I never thought of it that way. I know there's a lot of people who go to the ER and, like you say, they can't reach their doctor. I imagine you guys get dumped on with everything. Have you seen over the course of your career, have you seen an increase of that? Some of we deal with a lot of different things with our society, and seems like a lot of things are in downgrade when it comes to people's incomes, people being poor. Have you seen that scale up, or has it been a continuum?
Absolutely. My anecdotal impression, of course, I'm only one person working in one hospital, but in a poor state, my anecdotal experience is, yes, the people are a lot of people out there are really struggling, that when you write a prescription for an antibiotic that costs $60 or $70, and that is an amount that they simply cannot come up with. These are illustrations over and over again. People have nowhere to go. They're losing, when you have hard economic times, they lose their jobs. They don't have access. They don't have other places to go. And the mood seems in the country, at least in the Albuquerque area, certainly things are not getting better. Particularly in the COVID pandemic, when so many are really struggling to make ends meet. So many jobs have been lost. And so I think that the emergency medicine is a particularly good place to sort of take the temperature of society as a whole.
Maybe we need to have more presidential candidates and congressional candidates or elected officials visit ERs and spend a day.
That would be great. And the ER is not really about the high drama and everyone running around. At least probably 90% of it is about the other. Yeah.
How do you feel about, I don't know if you talk about this in the book, I didn't get fully through it, but how do you feel about there's a gentleman who wrote a book called The Death of Expertise. I'm trying to get him on. It's a little bit older book, and so there's not pushing the publicity, but it's been extraordinary over the years to see doctors maligned with this everybody knows it all sort of thing, and it got worse with COVID, and you see people questioning doctors, and you're just like, especially with what was it, the anti-vaxxers and stuff, and you guys are professionals. You spend years, if not, I don't know, a decade or something like that in schooling and books and education, and some guy reads a Facebook post and suddenly he thinks he knows more, and you guys have to confront that. Like, I want to punch those people in the face, and I'm not a doctor, but you guys have to deal with it. And then you have a situation where a patient's fighting you, which I don't remember 20 years ago when I used to go see doctors that we used to fight with the doctor. We just went, okay, we'll take the pills and go home.
It's interesting. There definitely is this, I think you said the death of expertise, the idea that when knowledge is disseminated on the internet, that everyone's opinion is as good as everyone else's in any area, not just medicine. That is potentially a dangerous view, I think, for society. The idea that, because there are people who know more than other people, and it's not necessarily by any means exclusive to medicine. Medicine is one of those tricky things because it's very hard for patients to know whether they're getting good medical care. They really don't. It's very hard for anybody, no matter who they are, who is not that familiar with how medical decision making is made, to know whether they're getting good care. So they tend to rely on secondary cues from the service industry. So were people nice to them? Did they get a blanket? Did they have to wait a long time? I'm not joking.
This is your Yelp reviews, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Like hotel management sort of thing.
They saved my life, but I didn't get enough blankets.
Well, it may be, and I waited so long, and they there's, and so the corporate influence on medicine has taken full advantage of those things.
Wow.
And so a lot of times it's increasingly becoming a customer service based field,
Wow.
which is a dangerous precedent to set, because it's not the same as buying a product, selecting a car to buy or something like that. There's a fundamental difference between that contract between physician and patient than between retailer and consumer.
Yeah, we saw kind of some of that through the crisis with the opioid epidemic, didn't we? Epidemic, where people were just like, "Hey, I want some drugs," and doctors started going, "Okay, whatever makes you happy." Customer service, I don't know.
100%. You're absolutely right. And what happened with the opioid crisis was that pharmaceutical industry, basically came up with fictitious data that said that opioids should be used for chronic pain, and they marketed, sometimes fraudulently, this idea around the country to physicians and also to patients. And then, in part because of exactly what you said, keeping people happy, a lot of doctors started prescribing and were encouraged to prescribe opioids, and patients became basically got a very large numbers of people on opioids in that way, in a very cynical kind of way, driven by a quite predatory pharmaceutical industry, and also the fact that it's much easier to just write somebody a prescription for Percocet and get them out of the office so that they don't complain or what have you. And so It was kind of a perfect storm, and a lot of people got hooked on oral opioids, and then moved from there to heroin and IV forms, and then heroin and fentanyl and these sorts of things have never been easier to get than they are now. I mean, the war on drugs, it's unbelievable how plentiful these things are.
Yeah, we'll throw someone of color into prison because let's be honest, what's going on for an ounce of marijuana, but hey, go for the thing. It's interesting to me what you mentioned that hey, we'll just give them a prescription, otherwise they'll complain to management and tell them how horrible I am. And you probably do see people that come in the ER that I've heard some extraordinary stories where people actually break a finger or something just to get, their fix. And you guys can probably really smell that when it comes in, where you're like, I know this guy's an addict and he's just trying to hustle for stuff. Yeah,
it's very, very easy. It's very transparent when that happens. It's happened less now because there's been a crackdown on it. But it's very easy to see. And it's also kind of tragic. I mean, when people are reduced to that point, when they're feeling that bad that they have to come to the ER and make something up to get a short-term shot of something. It's really it's fair. That's a pretty tragic person.
I had in 2004, that's when I first found about Oxycontin, and my friend, her sister had gotten really almost killed in a car accident, and she was in a head rack with the whole thing. And so she lost everything because she'd been in an accident, lost her job, and so she ended up staying with her mom, and they put her on Oxycontin. And I never heard of it before that, but this is like 2004, and like they talk about how bad it got recently, and you're like, I started hearing about this stuff a long time ago. And so she got hooked on that, and she would constantly use it for pain, and it became an addiction. And then once she got better, she once she couldn't get it from doctors anymore, she switched to heroin, and then she started working the street, and then she eventually died of an overdose. And that's when I went, I'm never taking that crap ever.
Yeah, that's a very sad story, and it's a very enormously common one. I mean, that's a very common road. Wow. People get an injury, they get hooked on the oral opioids, and then either continued with oral opioids or moved on to street drugs, and it killed an enormous number of people. I mean, it was not this was just an absolute travesty, and the Sackler family, especially Purdue Pharma, but not just them, others as well. Were very actively promoting opioid use at that time. And still there has not been sort of a full reckoning of any of that. There's class action lawsuits and so on going on.
Yeah. I mean, we'll go get old Chapo and spend all the money for the drug war and put everyone in jail. But you look at what they were dispensing in West Virginia, places like Virginia, that were just like a drug cartel. Sort of.
Yeah, it is very hard, honestly, to distinguish between the drug cartels and that sort of thing. And as you said, they put enormous numbers of people of color, African Americans in particular, during the crack epidemic, in prison for long periods of time, for very mild or minor offenses, relatively speaking.
Yeah. We've done a lot of talking about that on the Chris Voss Show. We've had a lot of authors on, and Black Lives Matter, of course, has been a theme through this. In your book, what's the biggest takeaway, or some of the biggest takeaways you'd like for people to really get when they read it or walk away with?
Well, I think that one of the ways we sort of examine life in our own lives is through the context of stories of others. So it was an attempt to sort of make sense of my own life in a way, to try to see the world after 25 years of being exposed frequently to often very, very dark stories and very dark events. Not exclusively dark ones, though, but nonetheless. And so what does that reveal about the world we live in? How do you make sense of that? And ultimately, how do you find some sense of sort of peace, not only for yourself, but perhaps some sort of wisdom in the face of, what seems often very inexplicable and deeply, deeply unsettling. And that's, in some ways, it's almost a Buddhist kind of question. And so that was the intent behind this, for me, behind this book, not to make points about medicine or specifically, or the opioid epidemic or policy or anything like that. It was more to explore these larger questions that have to do with reconciling and hopefully synthesizing the experiences of our own lives, so much like a novelist would do.
So you hope people will take away from your experience maybe better lessons on life, or contemplation of what their experience of life through your stories, and through watching you, of course, go through your own sort of catharsis of how to deal with these things and how to put things in peace with as much as you can. Yeah,
I don't presume to be instructing anyone. I'm not trying to tell anybody what lessons to learn. more and more it was an attempt to sort of portray my own movement or my own attempt to find lessons.
Yeah.
And to work through some of these questions.
And that's the beauty of what we get through stories and books and movies and everything else, and why we collect stories, is because we watch them and it touches us or moves us or motivates us in some way, where we look at, just like you looked at the young boy on the table as your son, where you look at it and go, you reflect on your own life, and you hopefully take lessons from it as well. Did you hope in the book that when people read this material and your prior books that they would hopefully maybe come away with a little bit more respect or understanding of what goes on in your industry, and maybe just respect it more or have a better education of it, I guess?
Yeah, maybe not so much respect. I'm not out there trying to get people to say us. Doctors are great. Yeah, no, it's not that. It was more sort of trying to offer a window into an often mischaracterized world.
Yeah.
That I think you touched on a little bit with sort of popular shows, like yeah.
There's more ER shows on TV than there are, I think, just about anything else. So.
Yeah, I wish we were all that smart and good looking, is all I can say, just trying to sort of pull the curtain back a little bit toward what seemed to me more essential about this sort of work, or anyone who does work like it. And it's not simply doctors who do that.
For me personally, I hope people would find more respect for your guys' industry. It was extraordinary to watch this COVID thing with just the insanity of people going. I watched the doctors in that were doing the videos going, "Please God help us, stop being stupid people," and they were talking about their experience, and they had people that just run around going, "I'll do whatever I want, hold my beer," and you're just like, these folks are trying to save everyone's lives. They're overwhelmed to an extraordinary thing, especially like in New York, and some cities now are spread around the nation. And you're just like in their face. And then seeing the, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but seeing some of the nurses go out and just get ridiculed and treated like crap. And all they're trying to do is save people's lives. They're just like, "Hey man, we're just trying to help you, help us, help you." And, it was an insane thing for me to watch. I couldn't imagine being on the other side of it.
Yeah, it's our national response to this has been really perplexing, to be honest. It's for many, it's still abstract, and because of its abstraction, they can fools rush in. Frankly, the idea that somehow wearing a face mask is a political statement. Yeah. When really it's like, this isn't. During World War II, the United States was not saying, there weren't political divisions with the United States fighting Nazi Germany, right? Yeah. And this is not in the same way, at any rate. And this is actually analogous to that. This is a enormous world event. Arguably, certainly in 100 years, the greatest public health challenge that anyone has had. It should be a unifying force where we put aside some political divisions and say, okay, what's the practical way of controlling this thing? Yeah. Not an opportunity to sort of falsely confuse something like wearing a face mask, which is like, wearing a helmet in battle, yeah. with a political statement. I mean, it's ridiculous. And on the national level, I think our failures have been just extraordinary. Mm-hmm. from the point of view of simply organizing a national response. We've left hospitals and states completely on their own, reinventing the wheel, doing the best they can. We have not create an adequate system of either testing or personal protective equipment or contact tracing or any of the basic things that the federal government should have done. And really, in my lifetime and really all previous administrations, Republican or Democrat, I would think would have happened. It's just mystifying to me that as a nation we've responded to this in the way that we have.
I think the internet is partly, like we say, everyone's an expert now and they read anything on the internet, but there has been a death of expertise. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie Idiocracy, but it seems like we're trying to make that. It seems like when I first saw it, I was like, this is the dumbest thing. I couldn't even barely watch it. Now I watch it and I go, this is a documentary. This isn't fiction anymore.
I know.
This is where we're headed. I watched the videos and the doctors and nurses were just extraordinary in how they would try and educate the public. And I would watch them suit up and put on all the PPE and stuff that they have to do. And you realize they wear that for like 12 to 18 hour days, just on probably normal shifts, let alone what a lot of them were going through in the hellscape of the overload of COVID. And then you see these people like, if I have to put on a mask for 5 minutes, it stops oxygen in my brain, I'll die. And you're like, seriously?
Yeah. I mean,
have you seen a nurse suit up?
Yeah, no, I know. It's really a shame because this could have been an opportunity for a collective spirit and unity in this country. I was hoping so too. And instead it seems to, so far it's been something that's put pressure on society. And our divisions have come up. I mean, we've splintered along in the face of this pressure collectively instead of uniting. And that's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Hopefully, I don't know. I mean, COVID is such an extraordinary, I mean, if you could pick something that could just take us on and wipe us out, not only from a economic aspect, but from a health aspect, from a being able to interact with each other aspect. I've got 2 sisters in care centers right now, and COVID just stalks outside their door every day. In fact, they admitted one new resident recently, and they fortunately they quarantined him. They did everything right, but the guy had COVID, and if they hadn't done everything right, the whole care center wiped, like we've been seeing. So you've got a few other books that you've written that are pretty interesting. I don't know if you want to plug those as well.
Sure. Well, like I said, the first book was The Blood of Strangers, which is similar to this, except again, written from a different point of view, I think. And then a couple of novels. The most recent one is a book called Rite of Thirst, which was about sort of international aid work set in the Middle East. I spent time as a child overseas and in the Middle East, particularly, and so I would certainly. That book is available on Amazon as well. But they're all published by HarperCollins. So the HarperCollins website should have both Rite of Thirst and White Hot Light. And The Blood of Strangers is still in print. So
yeah, it's a very popular book. What were some of the things that you changed your mind on, maybe between Blood of Strangers and this new book, White Hot Light?
I think you become. I think you realize that you're part of a larger story a little bit better when you're older. That you're when you're young, everything seems very individual. Your own individual ambitions, your own individual hopes or whatever they may be. And as you get older and have a little more perspective, I think you realize that you're really just one of many. That people tend to go through very similar events. That you're part of a larger, broader human experience. That it's not singular to you. That life is sort of rippling through you. You start from the beginning as a kid, and some of the stories in this book talk about that. Some events back when I was even very young, and then you're a son or a daughter. You move through life. You have children of your own, and you can see that you're on a path that is very well trodden, that you're just one of many. And there's almost a certain comfort in that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know if that answers your question at all. But
does it? No, that does. That's great. When you say there's a certain comfort in that, is the comfort in finding that you don't have to carry the world and it's not your responsibility? So, or that you're in a larger part of a map and you realize that is your contribution, or?
Yeah, I think that your own individual, America is a very isolated society. It's a nation of individuals, and we value individualism. And there have been some benefits to that, but also some great costs. There's a lot of loneliness in America. It's one of the things you see in the emergency room a lot. People alone, people coming in toward the end of their lives with hardly anyone around them. And over again, you see that in this country. And I think you realize that as you age, and this is not some kind of great profound observation, but that the things that you do understand about this life tend to be one another, from relationships you have with other people and your own sort of in the context of your life, how it relates to others, whether they're your children or your family, that we're not truly in isolation. It's a mistake to think of ourselves that way, and to think of our own individual ambitions is so terribly important. You realize that you're not going to set the world on fire, right?
The world doesn't revolve around you when you get older, basically.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You're a witness and you're part of it, but you're not as important as you thought you were when you were young.
I think that's one of the things I've discovered as I get older. I realize that there are millions of people that pass this way, and I'm going to leave some footprints behind, but probably the dust will blow them away very shortly. Hopefully I'll make some impressions that will be lasting, and that will be my contribution. But when you look at the grand scope of the names that are remembered and the people that are remembered, I mean, it's very few of the mass that do. But do you find a lot of people that read this book? Do they come from the medical community? Do you get a lot of feedback from young people that are going through school with wanting to be a doctor or a nurse in the medical field, and they read your books, or is it I would say it's probably a good book for them to prepare, especially for this book, because they can see what you've done down the line in the experience of hopefully maybe what they learn from without having to go through all the years learning it themselves, maybe.
Well, to be answered your question, the book was published just a couple days ago.
Yep.
So I just don't know what people's responses are going to be to it. I hope that it would have some relevance to students. My first one, The Blood of Strangers, is still used in a lot of medical school and college classes. And I'm hoping that this someday will maybe take be by its side in that. So to answer your question, is this written for medical people? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
It's written for a general audience, and even more than medical people. It's written for people who know nothing about medicine or may not even be interested in medicine.
Yeah, it's definitely eye-opening. I mean, I'm kind of familiar with what goes on in ER, but this definitely goes into depth and gives a very sobering, visceral sort of exposure to it all. And what's interesting too is we see the stories through your eyes and your experience with it, and your experience of dealing with these cases and kind of your mental process as well. And I think that makes it even more interesting. There was another question I had for you. It was along the line of the medical students, but I think this is something that's important for people to read, to see what's going on, to, in my opinion, gain some better respect for what goes on in our medical community. It was about, you probably see a lot of in ER people that are lonely, like you mentioned before, that are hypochondriacs, that they're just looking for attention or whatever. And you mentioned the loneliness, and I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, loneliness is a big part of hypochondria.
Yeah.
The wanting to be seen, wanting to be significant in some way in front of others, The longer I've done this, the more I realize just how much our sort of human psychology plays into symptoms. And we tend to sort of talk about these distinctions between, oh, it's all in your head, that kind of thing. And a lot of things are in our head. I mean, a lot of the reasons that people come to the ER have to do as much with their emotional state or their psychological state than any physical ailment, than any traditionally physical ailment, I should say.
Maybe you guys need a psychologist out front first as the first gatekeeper.
Right. Well, these are, and it also speaks to our heart. I mean, these are real problems. They're not any less real than physical problems, but we see enormous amount of mental illness, for example, because as a society, we've basically said, you're mentally ill, you have a severe mental illness, you're out on the street. I mean, we'll cover your meds, but a lot of homelessness, a lot of substance abuse, a lot of things like that.
Wow.
A lot of the people who have been sort of cast aside by American life.
And you guys, I would imagine you guys have seen enough of the stories, the timelines, like you can read the future, where you can see someone who comes in, especially maybe in that situation, where how it goes, and you're going to see them again more and more, and maybe there's going to be a downgrading of where they end up.
Absolutely. You see a young person, for example, who's withdrawing from alcohol, somebody in their 20s who's just shaking and has DTs. That is a bad path that they're going down. And unless something changes, that how that story will end.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we see that a lot. We see a lot of those kinds of patterns that will end badly. That they will.
Yeah.
So you try to do what you can to intervene, and you hope that you will, maybe make someone change their mind along the way.
When you go home at night, do you think about those stories? Do you try and turn the switch? Because I imagine you can't spend your whole life in depth with that. You've got to find some peace or distraction or something. I would drink heavily.
Yeah. No, you get really good at turning it off. Mm-hmm. I mean, it inevitably it spills out into how you look at the world and how you look at into your personal life. It spills out a little bit for sure, but you get pretty good at leaving the hospital and putting it in the rearview mirror and not. So to answer your question, when I'm off work, am I like thinking about cases? No, I'm not. I think I probably was at one point more than I do now, but I can. You get quite good at compartmentalizing, regardless of what kind of work you do. When people, come home, they're not always their minds aren't always in the office, right? Yeah. Fortunately, because who wants to live like that,
Yeah, that would be a tough thing to do
for any of us.
Yeah, and I remember, I've had friends that their wives or girlfriends, where they run to the ER every time the kid gets sniffles, and you're like, it's quite extraordinary. You look at the burden on insurance and everything else. I had one friend who was a hypochondriac, and for 40 years they were dying of something at any given time, but somehow they lived 40 years. And
that's reassuring, isn't it? That's good.
Yeah, and they would go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, there's literally nothing wrong with you, and try and apply to him that loneliness and anxiety and fear, and maybe to see a psychiatrist. And they would literally go get a second opinion. Most people, when they go to the doctor, if they go get a second opinion, it's because the doctor goes, you have cancer, and they're like, I'm getting a second opinion. This person, when they wouldn't get a second, the doctor say there's nothing wrong with you, they'd be like, I'm going to get a second opinion. Right. I'm going to find a doctor who tells me there's something wrong with me.
I'm going to go to the Mayo Clinic.
There you go. Well, this has been an interesting discussion, in depth, and the beauty of humanity, doctors, ER, hospitals. I would hope more people would give you guys. I actually spent a little bit of time in the ER recently with my sister at a care center who got a lung infection, and they weren't sure if she had COVID, but she developed some sort of weird lung infection. It was pretty bad there and drained her and everything. But we went into ER, and it was crazy, some of the people that were in there. And it wasn't they were bad people, but there was one guy in there with dementia who was swatting at nurses and wanting to throw fists. And he was clearly demented. So you felt sorry for him, but he was he was starting to freak everybody out. And and you guys have to deal with this on a daily basis. And I just think you guys are great in having to deal with it. I mean, I know you guys get paid for this and it's your job and whatever people want to dispense with it, but this really is to me, you guys are just really great human beings. That's my vote.
Well, thank you. I think that people are no different. It's easy to claim virtue, but really, I mean, there's nothing different about doctors. I
don't know, Frank. I'd have a hard time dealing with it. I would go to the drink. I own business since I was 18. I drank a lot of vodka, and that was over that stuff. I find what you guys do extraordinary. So I think it's awesome. Anything more you want to tell us as we pass the book and pick that baby up on Amazon or local dealers?
No, thank you. And I hope that your listeners will take a look at this. It's I hope that it's not your typical kind of book about medicine.
Definitely. And it's not the Hollywood ER shows that you see on TV. It's extraordinary how many of those are. I'm like, there's people who like a lot of ER stuff on TV, and there's people who are plotting to kill people with all the, what is it? I don't even watch TV anymore because I can't deal with it. But all the, murder stuff on TV. You're like, I've seen enough of it to go, I'm never killing anyone because my DNA, I'll screw up the crime scene and that'll just happen. So guys, be sure to check it out. It's Frank Huyler. It's his White Hot Light, 25 years in emergency medicine. If you're not going to learn something from this gentleman after 25 years, I don't know what to tell you. And it's really beautiful. You can check out his other book, The Blood of Strangers, which has been hugely popular. He's a great author, and I think you'll love the book. Thanks for spending some time with us, Frank.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Awesome sauce. To my audience, be sure if you didn't get a chance to watch the video version, let's go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that like button so you get all the different things that we do. Further show your friends, neighbors, relatives. Go to thecbpn.com, and we'll see you guys next time.